So
here we are.
We are back,
Mm-hmm.
and this week we decided to talk about...
Yeah, it was my idea. I decided we should talk about Running Wild films. One, because I didn't know it, but you sent out the notice that this was the 5th.
No, actually now we're in the 6th.
The 6th, and we talked about doing a 5th anniversary
Right.
Thing, but we didn't. And so this is playing catch up one more time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I suggested it. We talked about doing Bogdanovich, which we'll do. But I thought every so often for anything, you need a recap.
Yeah.
You need to say, where did we come from and where are we going and what have we done in between? What are the stops we made?
Mm-hmm.
You know? And so it should probably be annual, just because it's,
I like that idea.
that's the way most companies work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm not a business person, but
Right.
they do that. And at the university, we did that periodically ourselves, you know, so that we understand what progress or what direction we want to go in. And you don't always get to go in the direction you intend because other things get in the way, or, you know, obstacles come, but that's part of the fun of doing something.
Right.
That's part of the surprise of it. So
Exactly.
let's start with how it began. We'll give you the floor.
Well, when I describe it to most people, I say that you're the only good thing that came out of film school.
No, that's not true.
Right, there are a couple others,
Yes.
but mostly, you know, the film school experience is not something that I think taught me a whole lot about the actual practical nature of making movies. But I took a class from Gus, and like most good professors, it's not really what you get in the class or in the, you know, the main syllabus, but these, you know, all of the extra stuff that makes it worth it, all the stories and you know, a lot of information about films. So then I just started taking all of your classes,
Mm-hmm.
and eventually you recognized me. Probably
Yes,
you said,
yes.
you know, look at this guy, you know. And then we started to have lunch when I did an independent study with you about film noir.
Right.
And I graduated, and soon after you retired,
Mm-hmm.
but the independent study was done, and lunch every week, as we still have, continued. And I was burnt out after film school. I'd submitted this project to a bunch of festivals, the one I did, The Ruffians.
Right.
And about a year later, I think it was, maybe a little more, June-ish, 2010, I said, give me a script.
Yes.
Any script, I don't care what it is, I want to make a film again. And then you gave me Man, Woman, Motel Room.
Right.
What was your perspective of that?
Okay.
Or now you take the ball and keep going.
Now, my remembrance of things was what really to me, and I'm bad with dates, but I could actually anchor this, was I went to see, I was here, and one night I got up and I just decided, you know, I'd go right across to the movie theater here to go see The Departed.
Mm-hmm.
And I sat in a chair, it was about 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, the late show. And the theater was relatively empty, and you were there.
Mm-hmm.
And you came over, and you sat with me. We said hello, and then you came over and you sat with me. And to me, that anchored the thing, because
Right.
at that moment, you stopped being a student and started becoming a friend.
Uh-huh.
And after that, we talked, and one thing evolved after another, you see. But for me, the crucial moment was that night at that movie theater when you came, you sat with me,
interesting, yeah.
and we watched the movie and we discussed it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that was a start. Anyway, now your turn.
Well, to move forward with the projects,
Mm-hmm.
you gave me this script that I think had been a short play,
Yes,
right?
It had
Like a
been,
10-minute play.
yes,
right?
exactly.
And we really established sort of the method of running wild, and the sort of, we went against everything that I had learned in film school, meaning that you don't need a big budget, you don't need a lot of shooting time to do a short film, and it's really more based on the story and the performances. So I got a couple actors, and
You got a motel room.
motel room on Van Buren
Yes.
that we'll talk about returning to that motel room years later for a short that Gus directed. Anyway, but we got a motel room, and very, very seedy. To me, not seedy enough. I remember the actors walking in and saying, "This place is so gross," and thinking in my mind, "I wish that cockroaches were crawling up the walls. It's not gross enough." But it was just me, and then the cinematographer Emilio. There was no crew. I think I held the boom. I think. Right, he held lights.
I was around,
sometimes.
so yeah.
It was just crazy, but it cost us all of $60 in 6 hours to produce this film, and then we cut it together, and we, instead of doing the festivals or anything like that, we just put it out. You know, so, and that there we go. Now the ball's to you again. Yeah,
and then we threw around a series of ideas about just doing things. From my point of view, really. I didn't see where it was going. I was enjoying the process, but where it ultimately went was really your direction. I had retired, I was done, I mean, as I am, and so for me it was essentially, which it still is, senior citizen mischief, like that. And I think I never articulated it, and I remember I said, you know, you probably have to carry the ball more than I do because you're building a career.
Right.
I've had my career. And so there was, you know, I wasn't trying to start a new career, you know, at 71 years old, you know,
right.
Like that. And so we talked about the studio model at one point because we really talked about it as a learning process, not just for you, but for other individuals, because we thought about it as a team effort.
Right.
And we incorporated a number of people, particularly as writers, to come up with scripts that we would then assign to other people to direct, the way the studios had done that.
Right.
In the old days, where you know, what is it? Sunday night you got a script on your doorstep. Monday you started shooting it.
Right.
And all of people like John Ford and all of the classic directors that we know, who essentially set the pattern for all commercial films that we see, learn that way, you know. And so we were trying for that, and we
that was called the Studio Project.
Right. Yes.
And
yes.
it didn't. Unfortunately, it didn't really work.
Well, nobody bought into it.
Right.
Everybody wanted to just jump and do a film, presuming that they're masters of the craft.
Well, they also, I don't think that they liked the idea of working with someone else's script, or basically being assigned a script.
Right.
And they really didn't buy into the idea that you could make a short film in so little time.
Right.
And I think we said 4 weeks, something like
yes,
that,
yes.
from pre-production to, you know, which, you know, to me still seems kind of crazy. And then I think that was the stepping stone to eventually doing the 52 films in 52 weeks.
Right.
But obviously that came later.
No, but again, it just explains how our philosophy essentially diverged from what we call the mainstream philosophy. And if there was anything I kept saying in class was, don't try to do things Hollywood's way.
Right.
And the reason I said it, and everybody misunderstood, because they felt that, you know, somehow I hated Hollywood or didn't like what the product was. I kept saying, one, they have more money than you'll ever have. Two, they have the expertise already.
Right.
So you can't do it their way. You have to find a new way. And I looked at a model of the French New Wave. And we decided that we were essentially worshiping at the cathedral of Godard, Jean-Luc Godard. And so we would do that. And simultaneous with this, and one of the things that we talked about in great detail, and I had actually talked about some of this at the university, is the fact that so many people want to jump on behind the camera and direct, but they don't have any sense of what a good script is, you know. So we kept saying, I kept saying, and you added to that, that people needed to read more and learn structure, learn literature, you know, a lot, learn how stories are told. Even if you're not interested in becoming a director, that you needed to do that. You had taken literary classes, literature classes. You had written stories and stuff. So talk about
Well,
that.
that's the other good thing that came out of ASU was
Yes.
I took, just like I took a ton of your classes, I discovered this professor there, Paul Cook, who's a science fiction writer as well. And I just started taking everything he was teaching. American literature, English literature, the short story, you know, where I discovered the work of John O'Hara and just started and really learned. I think that's where I mainly learned storytelling, was in those classes, going back to the classics and also more modern literature,
Right.
but seeing what works, what doesn't, specifically in the short form. Because I think that you have to learn the short form before you can have the discipline to expand it into the feature, you know. So that was my experience with that, and I, you know, I took so much from it.
And again, that informed the philosophy
Right.
behind Running Wild. We're talking really about foundational things, because once you started moving, then all of that, you know, it's like an iceberg. You need that to support
Right.
everything that becomes visible on top of that.
Right.
You know, like that. So that's why we're talking about what created the foundation and informed the foundation of this across the board. So go ahead.
That, and also just I think the other foundation was just that we both love cinema and we're always exploring
Right.
different, not just the new wave, but anything. You know what I
Right,
mean?
right.
And this whole process has been about continuing to look at different kinds of films.
Exactly.
And that's a huge part of the foundation. I was going to ask you. Go ahead. Sorry.
Right. No, yeah.
I was going to ask you. You came up with the name Running Wild
Yes.
Films. I think it was in the first 3 or 4 months. Once we made a couple short films. How? Do you remember?
Yes. Because when I was a kid, there was a song. It comes all the way back from the 20s that I knew. I heard it on radio. I heard it on recordings. And then Marilyn Monroe actually sings it in Some Like It Hot.
Right.
Running wild, lost control. Running wild, mighty bold. Feeling gay, reckless too. Carefree mind all the time, never blue. Always going, don't know where. Always showing, I don't care. Don't love nobody. It's not worthwhile. All alone. Running wild.
But I always like the lyric from it. I'm a big one with songs and song lyrics. And I like the type, the thing, Running Wild, Lost Control, Running Wild, Mighty Bold, Running Gay, Reckless too. And so I thought, this is a good title for the kind of things we're going to do, because we're going to run wild, we're going to lose control, and we're going to run reckless too. And so that's when I came up with a name, and you agreed with it. You could have said no, and we could have called it something else, but I like the name, and I still do.
Well, you're pretty good with titles, I'll have to say. You've come up with some really good ones over the years. Our company title, the Durant's Never Closes title. So I try to listen when you say these things.
I actually studied, there was years and years ago, a course that it was on paper, it wasn't in a class, where they broke down all these titles, which were like the best titles in literature. And Streetcar Named Desire was one. After Many a Summer Dies the Swan was another. Shakespeare had about 7. A Midsummer Night's Dream. He had the most for a single author. And so I became really aware of what titles should do, whether it's on a story and whether it should be right on top of the plot idea, or whether, like Streetcar Named Desire, it gives you a mood, but it doesn't tell you specifically what's going on. But once you see the work, you can't think of another title for it. It was actually originally called The Poker Night. But that doesn't...
What a terrible title comparative.
Because they play poker.
Right.
But it doesn't embrace and encompass the entire mise en scene of what goes on there.
And I don't think that titles are as well done nowadays as they used to be.
Well, people, I don't know if people are as aware of it anymore. And remember, the studio system, they had an entire writers unit. And the writers, Scott Fitzgerald, all of them, they were very informed. What's his name? Faulkner.
Yeah.
People like that work for the studio system. Ben Hecht. And so these people were masterfully well read. And so they would come up with titles, and then we always laugh about the guy who, we call the idea man, who would walk around just throwing out ideas. And these guys had some literary background as well. And so sometimes they would just come up with a title and then get writers to write.
Right to that.
To fill that up.
I like that.
But anyway, so that was how Running Wild's title became the title.
Right. So we spent the first year making short films, mostly. And we went to, I think in that first year, we went to LA and shot the monologue with Eddie Jones, who's a character actor who's been in a ton of things, which was a great experience. And so you were directing a little bit, and I was directing and doing some of your scripts. And then it was a year pretty much from the creation of the company that we did our first feature film, The Big Something.
Right.
Hey! Don't move! Don't get your hands up! Don't move!
You don't have to worry, Bruce. You're not a suspect. There is no suspect here. In the 5 minutes you were gone, I closed this case. This is a suicide.
Wait, what? Something's going on here, and I really want to know what it is. Murder! And littering! What? This is definitely something.
It seemed just like we needed to do a feature film, and I'd been told, I'll never forget, I'd been told that it was going to be nearly impossible, that even for making it for $25,000, I was a fool. I was told this by local industry people, who I won't name, and then...
But all the wise heads always, they
say
talk
that
like
stuff.
that. They absolutely say it. I mean, and it still is the mantra in the religion that people follow.
Right. And then I remember I just said, we're going to do this screenplay reading. I'm going to bring a bunch of actors in. From that, I'm going to cast the film. I'm going to pick shoot dates with basically no money at that time, right? And then we did it. For around, what I remember as being around $1,000, we did the film, which and we shot it in 14 days in the middle of the Arizona summer. So it just showed that it was possible.
Again, where there's a will, it will happen. And one of the things I always have said, and I still will say, is that the worst excuse I know for not making your movie is, I don't have enough money. If you really want to do it, you'll find a way to do it.
Right.
And so that was another thing that informed what we were about. But the idea, and I mean, you say we all the time, but it's really you who did it. The ambition of doing the feature was yours. You got up and you said, yes, now it's time. You showed me a script.
Right.
And you were ready to do it. Actually, even The Ruffians was close to being a feature in terms of the length of it.
Right, it was longer.
And so already you were understanding that there's a point there where you go past making shorts. Just as much as with writers, they get to the point, Hemingway got to the point where he had to stop writing short stories and write a novel, if you want to really be taken serious.
Right.
And that happens. You can do both, one or the other. But generally, you have to do an extended work. Somebody once said that a masterpiece was never written on the head of a pen. And we know there are many, many good short story writers whose collection have put them into the canon of great literary writers and people. But it doesn't work in film that way.
No.
People don't really, they show them sometimes, but people don't really go to see a series of shorts unless somehow it's in a festival or they're in a class or something like that. But to commercially book a series of short films doesn't quite work, even when you get name directors doing it, or unified theme like, I Love New York, Je t'aime Paris.
Right, yeah. The anthology films. Yeah.
The New York stories. You really don't get a major audience, and they're considered, every one of those things are considered minor works in that particular director's canon.
None of them have really come together.
Not at all. The best body of that I'd seen, and I'm one of a few people who really liked it, was several of the Italian filmmakers during what we call the golden age of Italian cinema, when Fellini, Antonioni, and all those people were doing it. Fellini did, Toby Dammit, and things like that was part of an anthology series. But other than that, I don't know when they celebrated. So it was a smart idea.
Yeah, well, I think that, unfortunately in the film world, short films are not, you can't monetize them either. And that's the biggest thing. No. There's no way to really sell them effectively. YouTube has changed that a little bit in the sense that if you make a hit YouTube film, technically you are making money off of it. But I think that's interesting to go back to that I remember, my mom said two things. My mom said probably the best thing she's ever said to me in my life. I remember I went over to her house the night after I'd finished making The Big Something. We'd had this rap party. I did a bunch of crazy, wild things, puked my guts out the next morning, right? And then went to my parents' house to recover, right? And she said this to me. She said, I knew that you were really a filmmaker and that this was not a hobby when the day after you'd wrapped your feature, you were talking about the next feature. Because I was talking about The Detective's Lover that next day. But also, I thought it was interesting, we had a team after that film. And we had a meeting probably a month later and to talk about the next feature. And I said, well, we're also going to do these short films, Comanche, Night Train to Phoenix. And I remember one of the people in that meeting who doesn't work with us anymore said, wait, why would you want to go back to short films once you made a feature? But to me, this is like the John O'Hara thing, right? He writes novels in the wintertime and short stories in the summer. It's something that I always want to go back to, whether it's monetizable or not. I think it's more than a stepping stone to the features. It's a true form.
Well, it's for a lot of people, they see it as finger exercises, or your apprenticeship, that you have to go through these steps before you mature into features, is the way they kind of view it. But like you, I don't see it that way. And in the theater, I had a similar pattern, because I like writing monologues. And people always saw my writing just monologues as finger exercises, because somehow they felt, he must be having a writer's block. So, because he can't write a play where people interact with dialogue with each other. But there were times when I just had characters that stood alone, and I didn't have a story to, put them into, but they vividly were so alive that I had to give them voice, you see. And it's the same thing with the short stories. Hemingway, almost to the end, wrote short stories as well as novels, like that. And so I think that's still very good practice. Again, going back to our man Godard, he did it all the way through, and Godard keeps going. The other thing I wanted to say was, right from scratch, we always decided that we would maintain a spirit of experimentation. And again, Godard, we're going to try new things. For me, I have never been that interested in straightforward commercial cinema, or not necessarily commercial cinema, but traditional cinema. Only because I think there's so many people who do it better than I do. And I'm always looking at things where either monologues or some other art form. Subsequently, people like Margaret Duras, Godard, what's his name, Herzog, and people like that are always interesting to me. And on my bookshelf here in literature, it's the same thing. I love Rope Grillet because nothing connects. It makes you crazy to watch the kind of movies he made, you know, because they were really adjunct to literature. So, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not a filmmaker in that sense. You are the real filmmaker, you know, because you actually speak through the camera. And with the images, I always think, how can the image support the spoken
text.
or the word or the text prose in some way?
And I think that the history of our company has been sort of a dancing back and forth between the traditional and the experimental. Even recently, I have felt that we haven't been experimenting enough, and with 7 Kisses and some other projects that I'm doing right now, trying to break the mold, because I think you have to do that now and then. You got to break the mold of what you're doing, step outside, do something completely different, left-handed, to see, and it switches things up, and it informs the traditional work too.
Right. Oh, very much. It enriches it.
Yeah.
Let's move away from the philosophical and theoretical.
Go back to the practical.
And let's just talk about some of the signpost works that happened throughout the time, because we're not going to have 3 hours. I didn't have the patience
at this point,
to sit with us for 3 hours while we talk about moment to moment.
You picked them because you've stood outside from a more objective perspective.
Okay, well, let's start with the features, okay? So you did The Big Something, and that went out, and people realized that a film can be done this way. We realized it, you realized it, and then you moved to The Detective's Lover. And that was a different experience for you, I think, because in that you also played the lead.
Yeah, I decided
character.
to play,
Yes.
Which still may have been a mistake, but regardless, it was a learning experience.
I'm not sure it was a mistake. I'm not talking about the end result, but I'm talking about, again, the learning process where I think it's always important, and I did it in the theater periodically, for a director to act. And the reason is, I think for the director to know what he's putting the actors through.
True.
To understand the actor's process. It's a unique kind of agony sometimes. And sometimes as a director, you can put the actor in, you can agonize the actor more than you need to. And you also understand something about what the actor can do non-verbally, which helps with the writing, which helps with a lot of other aspects of either play or filmmaking.
Right.
And so I think it was a good idea for you to have done that, to go through that process at least once. And as I said, periodically do it.
Yeah.
Again.
Which I have.
Yeah.
And I mainly did it just because I didn't know anyone else that I felt could play the character as well as because I wrote it and I was close to it. And I basically, I wrote myself into the script without necessarily realizing it until the script was done. So that's why I did it.
Yeah,
and it was an
100%,
interesting experience. And there's I will say there's one value to playing the character, especially the lead character when you're the director, is you don't have to explain anything to this other person. There's always a difficulty as a director, and obviously it's part of the craft, to be able to explain to this other person the material, you know what I mean, and the scene. And with this, you save that time and you just go in and you do it.
And one of the things that Hollywood has proven is that self-direction is possible. I mean, Orson Welles did it all the time.
Right.
Clint Eastwood has done it over and over.
Yeah.
And you get any number of people who've done it. Redford came late to doing it, but ultimately did it and continues to do it. So George Clooney does it. And so it's not, and particularly with film, more so than stage people do it on stage too. But with film, you can actually see what you're doing and make corrections if you need to.
Right.
You know. Anyway, and then after that, we moved to the next project.
The next feature
was
The Men Who Robbed the Bank.
What happens after you rob the bank?
Is he dead?
I hope so.
Give me my gun.
You've worked with Stacy Nelson. We hear she's looking for a crew.
Put your guns on the table. Now your phones.
Why?
Hey, don't talk to her like that, man.
She's calling the shots.
And they're taking orders?
They're listening.
What about everybody else?
What about them?
I don't know. Who are they?
You'll meet them soon.
Guess you're not retired anymore, right, Bobby?
Okay. I'm gonna go get some coffee.
The Men Who Robbed the Bank.
Which was an interesting one because I've talked about this a little bit. I wrote a blog about our unnamed projects. I was working on 2 features before that. I don't know if you remember. One was a baseball thing I was trying to do. And the other was The Western, which was about a Western film crew in a bar after they rap. And I even had a cast together for the Western. But it just didn't seem right. I wanted it to be almost completely improvised without a script, and it just didn't seem like we were ready to do it. So I wrote The Men Rob the Bank. I think I got this idea, and it was one of the fastest times I've ever written a script. I think I wrote it within like 2 days, and then brought it to you and said, this is what I want to do. So, but what was your take on that project?
That's, you know, of all the films you've made, I think that's my favorite. And the reason I think it's my favorite is because of the constraints. It feels like a play. You could probably put it on stage if you want to. You have to make more changes than one thinks, than is apparent, because it's really fluid as a film. But it could be done on stage because it's done in one location, and it plays off the psychological tensions between a series of people waiting for something from without to take place. And so very much I like that, and you were able to keep the tension, and as I said, it is my favorite of the features that we've done so far. You know. Now by this time, my role has actually changed, really. I've become more, in Hollywood terms, executive. You know, in absentia almost, you know, where I am more advisory, really, which attends to my age, attends to my experience, etc. And you had put together a team.
Yes, the team was more forming. People were starting to be consistent.
And you got some key people.
Yeah.
You know, so when you talk about some of the key people, because nothing ever happens, I mean, in this work, we always say film is a collaborative medium, more so than any of the arts.
Right.
Dance is collaborative, but it's possible to choreograph a piece and dance a solo.
Yourself,
You know? And writing, of course, we know is primarily a solo work. But, and theater is really collaborative, but I've seen, again, solo works done.
Right.
Dr. Waters done that, where he wrote the play, he directed it, and played the lead. Played the role.
Yeah.
You know, like that. I didn't think it was possible, but I watched him do it and did it impressively. And I thought, yeah, it can be done.
One of the main ones was James, who came on from the Big Something onwards as our sound mixer, engineer, and really from the Detective's Lover onwards started to also be more invested than most of the crew, because he was talking with me about what we were going to do and how we were going to do it. So, you know, he became, his company 5J Media became, you know, a partner of what we were doing, a creative partner. And then at the time, an actor named Michael Coleman, who was also the lead actor of The Big Something, had become a very, key part of what we were doing. He helped shoot The Men Who Robbed the Bank with me, and he was just involved in everything we're doing. And many other people had come and gone, but I think that those were the two
consistent people,
main people. And then after that, after The Men Who Robbed the Bank, which we can get into, there's been some other people who have come out of the woodwork to be consistent members.
Casting.
Casting director Michael Hamlin, who was, this was the first feature that we had done, Men Who Robbed the Bank, together. We'd done a couple short films. So yeah, it was kind of, but what's interesting is that I think a lot of people from the work would guess that we have a huge team, but really it's just, for a long time it was just 2-3 people, and then now it's just 5-6 people, so
but
it's pretty small.
People come and go.
Exactly.
And if people pay attention to the short films and the feature length ones, you'll see a number of the actors repeating in the different films, which is like Hollywood does. I mean, and it's not because we're trying to create, in quotes, a star system, but you work with actors regularly. It creates a shorthand in terms of communication for the director and for them to understand the process. And that's one reason the studio had a system, because the actors could come in and you almost didn't have to explain anything to them. They came in, they did their work, they went home. And it made it possible, the studio thing, for films to be made quickly, but well. And it's the same thing that we were striving for and I think have achieved. So after The Men Who Robbed the Bank, you did a couple of improvisational feature things just to practice with that.
Well, I think that The Men Who Robbed the Bank, when I look back, one, I think it's also one of our best films. It must be the best because it was the least well received of all the features. So people still don't really know what to think of it.
My brother liked it a lot.
Well, there you go. I think I see that those first two films as being very Big Something and Detectives Leopard is being very plot and genre driven. And then to me, Men Who Robbed the Bank was a departure for the work because it became very character driven and mood driven, more so than what we've done. And to go along with that, we tried to do a couple improvisational features. One of them I shot on my birthday in 2012, right before 2013 when we started the 52. And basically we just got a few of our regular actors together, put them in a house. I gave them little tidbits of the story, of their story, and then said go. And we shot it live for an hour plus, me and Michael Coleman. And it was an interesting experience. I think it's watchable. I called it one. Is what I called it. And then I did two, and two was a complete disaster. Two was like the worst improvisation you could possibly have, and who knows whose fault that is. Sometimes it works one night, it doesn't work the next day, And we did that one more time. So we have done 3, but it was never completely cut together. It's technically called Mob Bitches, and it's about 4 mob wives who have a dinner party, and it's actually still being cut together. I've I've taken it, wiped off all the dust, you removed the cobwebs, and it's being cut together as we speak. So maybe there will be a 3rd. It's an interesting form I'd like to play with.
So now we're at we're at the 52.
We're at the 52.
To me, the 52, but go ahead, talk about it and then I'll tell you what it is to me.
Well, to go back to it, it was the idea of John Ford making a film every week back in the day and him learning that way. And I felt like I needed to put myself through an extreme boot camp, right, to get better as a filmmaker. And also, I started to feel like the only thing that makes a big difference in your career is to astonish people with ambitious projects. I feel like nowadays there's no studio system. You can't get by just making picture after picture. You got to do something, not necessarily flashy, but something that people go, whoa, really? He's doing that? We'd already done features, so I thought...
We've done shots.
So this is a project that I felt like when people hear 52 films in 52 weeks, they're going to go, no, he's crazy, you can't do that. So that's what I wanted them to think. Anyway.
Well, you used the word that I was going to use, which is astonish.
Which I learned from you.
Yes. It's a critical criteria we use when we say, astonish me in a work. And we're saying, show me something I haven't seen, or, amaze me in some way, based on the ambition or the intensity, or whatever, the subject matter, or whatever. I think of the 52 as the Mount Everest of what Running Wild achieved.
Okay.
In spite of, I know, the people who went through the Durant never closed this process.
Right.
That is probably the Everest for them. But I think the 52 is it. And people who knew, people I know who've been away, who knew of the ambition, still don't realize, because they weren't paying attention, that it was achieved.
Yeah.
You see, I had one friend from Hawaii who came and she knew of the intro to it. We're going to do 52 films in 52 weeks. And a year and a half later came and said, yeah, did you ever but you never made those films, right? Because I think basically she never believed it. And I said to her, of course we did. And it's shown, and I directed it to the website and everything else. And she looked at me like, are you crazy?
They're all online.
Yes, I said, and they were done in 52 weeks, And so that was the thing. But what I remember most vividly about it was when you came, you told me you're going to do it. And the first thing I said is, you're crazy.
Right.
And then you said, no, I think I can do it. And I said, yeah, I guess you can do it. Because I thought, you can do it.
Right.
Not one can do it, but you can do it. Because you have the energy and you have the youth and you have the will.
And plus we're running wild.
Yeah, well,
that's the whole point.
You were running wild.
Right.
And then I watched, and then more than that was the budget you determined that you would do. And it was the first time we went to Kickstarter, crowdfunding.
Right, exactly.
Because, go ahead, talk about the budget on that.
We decided the budget would be $10,000.
For 52 films.
For 52.
In 52 weeks.
So about 200 per, right?
Yes.
So we raised that for the first time through Kickstarter, which was a very stressful experience, and I've done it since then.
And the thing I was interested in and impressed by was the fact that you kept within the budget week by week by week. It wasn't something where you went over budget on this one, and so you sort of took from Peter to pay Paul over here.
There were a couple. But mostly
you stayed right on budget. Because I watched and I said, how are you doing? And you said, well, we got it right in with that. Because that's an interesting challenge.
Yeah.
Because each story required different things. And you said, well, with this we're going to go over budget on it, so how can I get this for free or donate it or whatever? You should talk a little bit about feeding crew. Well,
I had learned even from the Big Something that I saw these productions that would spend all this money on food, and it occurred to me, I said, can we get this for free? And I just started calling restaurants, starting with the Big Something and onwards, to get food for free for basically sponsorship. And we've been using it since then. Even on something as big a budget as Durant's, heck, it helps a lot when a restaurant will bring food in for 50 people, and in exchange they get a sponsorship or they get some attention, they help us out. So I did that as much as I could on the 52. The hardest part, I would say was not directing the 52 and should not be looked at as the greatest achievement. It would be producing the 52. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Because directing, once you're on set, you're doing your job, and I certainly learned lots of lessons, but putting it together, casting it, finding the locations, finding that free food, whatever it be, finding a sound person every week. Sometimes it ended up being me as the sound person because I couldn't find. James wasn't available or whatever, you know. And that was easily the most difficult part. And then I said the second would still not be directing, it would be writing. Because all of these were based off of public domain short stories.
Right.
And
By well-known writers.
Right. To pick 52, I probably had to read at least 200.
Right.
Right. And then I had to figure out how to adapt them. And I adapted them not with the idea of doing it exactly as it is, but really sometimes going completely off, just using it as a starting point. And some people have commented negatively on the shorts. On YouTube specifically, this is nothing like the original. And I go, well, great. You know?
Yes.
I don't think he even read the original. I did, but you know, I may have only taken 2 sentences from it.
Because the idea, because I read all the stories and I read all the scripts, because you gave them all to me,
Right.
and I went and had them reproduced for about $100.
Now that was also hard work as reading them.
But I had to read the original
Right.
as well, just to see where you're coming from. And again, one of the things I looked for was not if you were literally straightforward with the story, but if you would capture the spirit of the original, because you're dealing with a different medium, and where you also gave yourself certain limitations. One, you said that the stories had to all take place in Arizona,
Right.
because again, going back to the philosophy of Running Wild, is that we're going to tell Arizona stories.
Yeah.
The locations would be Arizona. That we would, as much as possible, utilize Arizona talent. We felt we didn't have to go outside. The people are here. Why not utilize that? And so the stories had to be changed. And the other, for budgetary concerns, they all had to take place within modern times,
Right.
in contemporary times,
Yeah.
because a lot of the stories are written 60, 100 years ago. And we didn't want to have to deal with period, because that would increase the budget and make it impossible to do that.
Plus, I believe that if these were really good stories,
Right.
which they are, then they transcend the time that they were
Exactly,
written.
yes. They have
Especially
a universal quality.
the ones that stood out the most from that was the James Joyce stories from Dubliners,
Right.
which after reading it and adapting them and directing it, I felt like, to me, that is the Bible of short stories. For me personally, there's nothing, you know, in there. You've got something like The Dead, which is considered to be the greatest, but all of them together as the Dubliners, and they're so modern. You see so much that just hasn't changed at all between when he wrote them in the early 20th century to now. So I thought that was an interesting learning process. We didn't talk a lot about the Arizona thing, which I think that we should touch on. I'll touch on it a little bit more.
I just want to make a comment on the Dubliners.
Yeah.
Again, I had read the Dubliners, I don't know, 40 years ago. Yeah, no, and they really, you know, outside of The Dead, which has been made into a couple of movies, I didn't see what you saw in them. And then you mentioned them, and I said to you, which stories are you going to pick? And you said to me, and this really astonished me, you said, I'm going to do all of them.
Right.
And I was like, 22? He said, yeah, they'll be part of the 52.
Right.
And then I went back and read them all,
Right.
and actually began to see, you know. And I think I might agree with you that maybe they're the greatest collection of short stories by a single author.
Right.
That I know of, you know.
And I think that's something that getting to future projects that I'd like to do, because I love short films. One thing I'd like to do is not to do 52 films in 52 weeks again. I might not live through the process, you know. You only climb Everest once if you're smart, in my opinion. But to take the Dubliners and do it in Mississippi or in Detroit, or even And I'm not even saying do it myself, but sponsor
sure.
other filmmakers to do them in those places, because you could take these stories again. You could even take the same scripts that I wrote, and it would have a totally different flavor depending on where your location is. You could do them in Africa or South America. So I'd like to, hopefully one day I'll get to play with that idea.
And assign a bunch of other people to do it.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and I'll just watch. But going back to the thing with Arizona is that was another big part of Running Wild, is saying that we're not going to go to LA or New York.
Right.
We're going to stay here and build an indigenous film movement. And it was the idea that you could do that nowadays, and that the idea of going to those film metropolises, was old-fashioned, really, and that you can make it happen wherever you are. So I think that was a super key aspect.
Yes, absolutely, because we talked about it, because we saw how many people leave when they left film school and go to LA,
right,
and they're working and doing, holding cable and doing this because they want to get into the industry, but they have the creative impulse isn't getting fed. And here, because you're creating opportunities for yourself, you can do it.
Right.
It proved that you can do it, because I can't think of anyone who went to film school before you, the ASU film school, and after, who's done as many features as you have, just because they're waiting for somebody else to provide the opportunity. Right. And there are times when you have to take the bull by the horns and just say, I'm going to do it. And that's part of what we did with Running Wild.
And just logistically, I was telling someone recently, they said, why aren't you in LA? You should be in LA. That's where everyone should be who's a filmmaker. One, I think that, like I said, that's old-fashioned and absurd. But two, I want to say to them, if I had moved to LA, I could never have logistically accomplished what I've done, because I would have been struggling so much to pay rent. Whereas I can live here for a lower cost, and I've been a full-time filmmaker since the big something. I turned away from my day job at that point and said there's no going back. I will never again work any job other than as a filmmaker.
Exactly.
So I wouldn't have been able to do that in LA or in New York, and I've seen that happen over and over again.
I see it all the time.
And it continues to happen. And I understand why people do it, but I think the main point is, just like there's an alternative to traditional filmmaking, there is an alternative to going to LA, and that people should consider staying where they are.
Well, you look at John Sayles, and he stays in New Jersey.
Right.
And he does his films.
And he moves around and does it in all these regions of the country.
Yes.
But you look at a writer who did it, William Faulkner.
Right.
He realized, not immediately, but after being in LA, that he could create one of the greatest bodies of literature there is by just exploring what was around him in Mississippi. So I think he's someone I keep going back to for that inspiration.
Well, his quote, that I love, where he said, I discovered that my little postage stamp of terrain contained all the universal truths that I wanted to try to explore in my literature, in my work.
And that's true. Yes. And it's any postage stamp, really.
Yeah. Wherever you're from.
Drop someone or me in the middle of Kansas and say, and then just start to explore that area, and there's amazing stories. I think that we should make this a part 1, part 2.
Yes, that's what I just came into my mind too. There's so much more to cover.
Well, there's a lot more. We've got 4 more features really to talk about, and just a lot more things, right? And the future direction of the company, which I think we should discuss as well.
Yes.
So we will split this up, and for those of you who have made it this far, we will see you in the next episode.
Yes.
Take care.
Okay. Bye.